the major news stories made simple and easy for your listening pleasure. We'll break it down for you in keywords. For today's Keyword News segment, we are joined by a brand new member, Eugene, filling in for Adam. Good morning.
Thanks for having me.
Are you an early riser, Eugene?
Yes.
Okay. I'm glad you joined us.
Thank you.
Eugene will be here for the next 2 days to cover keyword news. Let's jump into our first topic of discussion. This is our first keyword of the day.
COVID-19 and vaccine efficacy.
So let's first kick off with some COVID-19 news. Yesterday, the daily confirmed cases hit the second all-time high for the country ever since we began keeping tally. How are the figures looking today?
Yes, well, amid the uptick after the long Chuseok holiday, today's confirmed cases are expected to record some 2,040s or 2,050s at the maximum, which is about 400 to 500 lower than the day before. And this marks the 86th day since South Korea's daily infections topped the 1,000s and also the all-time high record for a Wednesday. Now, a majority of infections is coming from groups such as schools, kindergartens, and workplaces. As the virus prevention measures are set to expire on Sunday, the government is reportedly considering a further 2-week extension on the current social distancing measures.
And that certainly does not alleviate the situation for small and medium-sized enterprises are calling for, well, an alleviation of those restrictions, right? Now, partially due to these highly daily caseloads and paired with varying concerns, the South Korean government has urged the people to get vaccinated if they haven't done so already. Tell us why.
Yes, well, during a regular COVID-19 briefing on Wednesday, the government stressed the importance of taking part in the country's vaccination scheme as the vaccines are now showing clear efficacy. And this comes after a decrease in severely ill patients and the number of deaths following the country's rising inoculation rate. According to Son Young-rae, who is serving as the head of strategy of planning at the country's Central Disaster Management Headquarters, although this year's August confirmed cases exceeded that of last year December, the fatality rate actually recorded 0.35%, which was much smaller than December's 2.70%. And also in terms of severely ill patients, its August rate stood at 2.17%, which was a big 2.55% decline on year. So based on the vaccine's effectiveness, the government is also assuming that the latest virus surge is triggered and is centered around from those who aren't fully vaccinated. And backing the government's such argument, Seoul further mentioned that those non-vaccinated accounted for 93% of the country's COVID-19 patients over 18 years old during July to mid-September. And so far, to talk about South Korea's progress in the vaccination campaign, 75.5% of South Koreans have at least received their first dose of the vaccine, with 48% of the general population fully vaccinated.
The aim is to reach 80% fully vaccinated by the end of next month, right around the corner for us. It's interesting because we're still dealing with this pandemic, but on the topic of having a stronger response for next pandemics, we also have to take a look at vaccine situations and whether or not we can have a stronger response system, which brings us to our second keyword of the day.
Global vaccine hub.
That is the goal anyhow. South Korea has been reiterating its goal of becoming a global vaccine hub through locally producing existing vaccines within our own factories and aiming to become the world's 5th largest vaccine hub by 2025. There seems to be some good news in helping the country realize its plans.
Yes, well, on top of producing AstraZeneca and Moderna's vaccine, South Korea may also produce Johnson & Johnson's Janssen vaccines in the near future. Now, according to sources from Korea's biomedical industry, GC Pharma is discussing ways to locally manufacture Janssen vaccines. And this comes after Janssen made a smooth on-site visit to GC Pharma's Ochang factory, which is located in South Korea's Chungcheongbuk-do province, with no peculiar errors or problems found in the factory. So far, but GC has stated no specific decisions about the contract have been specifically made, but under normal circumstances, the completion of an on-site visit kind of serves as an optimistic sign for the contract. And this can also be seen through Samsung Biologics, who also took a very similar vague stance, just like GC Pharma, before it actually made its vaccine production contract with Moderna. And although even if if negotiations between GC Pharma and Janssen go smooth sailing, authorities are predicting that it will take some time before the actual contract between the two is concluded. However, should GC Pharma take charge of Janssen's local vaccine supply in South Korea, the country will be producing all global COVID-19 vaccines except for that from U.S. Pfizer and China Sinopharm. And so far, to talk about South Korea producing global vaccines, SK Bioscience is already manufacturing AstraZeneca vaccines, while Samsung Biologics is also currently test-producing Moderna's vaccines. And before moving on, to also briefly talk about Samsung Biologics, it will supply its first batch of Moderna vaccines within October if it receives swift permission from Korea's Ministry of Food and Drug Safety, and if the negotiation between the South Korean government and Moderna is smoothly progressed. Now, despite unrelated lawmakers predicting that the approval of producing Moderna's vaccines to come imminently, an official from the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety stated that the approval date has been undecided as Samsung Biologics Moderna vaccines haven't applied for a permission yet.
All right, so we're already producing a few key vaccines within the country, but we will expand those plans accordingly. On to our third keyword of the day.
Military rank transformation.
So looking at another important domestic news, South Korea's defense ministry has passed a recommendation of changing the existing 4-rank military system, which has been the status quo for as long as I can remember. Brief us on what happened and what led to the decision.
Yes, well, the Joint Committee of the Public and Private Military under the Ministry of Defense has suggested the Korean military system to simplify itself to a 3-rank one, considering the shortened compulsory military service. And right now, the current 4-tier system has remained unchanged since 1962 under the 36-month mandatory service, but the current term has been cut almost to half, which is quite a big change. And the committee also advised to eliminate hierarchical vocabulary from the rank names of the military soldiers, which will also bring a renaming in those ranks. And on top of such changes, the committee pointed out the need to change the straight line badge of rank design, which has also been maintained for 50 years since 1971. And the staff further explained the straight line of soldiers kind of symbolize the ground surface, while the V-shaped badge of petty officers imply plant life growing on the surface, which once again implies another hierarchy between the two. So as an alternative, adding a rose of Sharon, which is the national flower of South Korea, or even creating a brand new Taegukmark rank badge was mentioned by the officials.
The military manpower has come under question for a lot of scandals in recent months as well, and it seems that they're trying to address those problems and concerns from the public too.
Right, definitely. And also included within the recommendation of the Joint Committee was allowing civilians to join the Disciplinary Committee for assailants of sexual violence and harassment as council members bestowed with voting rights in order to strengthen the council's expertise, fairness, and objectivity. Well, until now, the military has only composed its disciplinary committee of soldiers and military civilian workers, which usually led to fairly light punishments, which also rose more controversies.
Right.
And additionally, new measures have also been introduced to prevent the privileges enjoyed by retired attorneys who previously worked for the military court and military prosecution. And finally, following Wednesday's final regular meeting of the Joint Committee, it will officially announce its full plan through a nationwide briefing session after holding one additional special conference.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. It seems that they have a host of adjustments and improvements that they want to make to, I think, address on a bigger picture these public concerns about what's fair and what is right. On to our fourth keyword of the day.
Korea-China nuclear talks.
So following North Korea's most recent test launch of an unprecedented hypersonic missile, the top nuclear envoys of South Korea and China held a virtual talk in response. Tell us more about this conversation.
Yes, well, according to South Korea's foreign ministry, top nuclear envoys of the two nations held online talks on Wednesday where they discussed specific countermeasures regarding the North's recently fired hypersonic missiles. And specifically, South Korea's special representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs, No Kyu-duk, shared Seoul's views towards the North's latest missile tests and dialogue, along with devising subsequent reaction plans with his Chinese counterpart Liu Xiaoming, who is serving as Beijing's special representative on Korean Peninsula affairs. And No especially urged for China's constructive cooperation while stressing the necessity of stably controlling the current situation as well as the importance of swiftly resuming the inter-Korean dialogue. And also responding to No, Liu evaluated South Korea's efforts in improving the Korean peace process as well as reaffirming China's will to cooperate by taking a more constructive role on the Korean peninsula.
So this was first a virtual talk, but I'm sure eventually with enough time they would want to sit down in person and discuss this matter more further.
Right. And the two sides agreed on meeting face-to-face at the fastest date possible to continue their talks. And meanwhile, after finishing his virtual meeting with Beijing, No Kyu-duk departed to Indonesia to hold additional talks with his U.S. counterpart Song Kim, who is serving as the U.S. Special Representative for North Korea and also doubling as U.S. Ambassador to Indonesia. And before leaving for Jakarta, No told the press that he would discuss matters such as, but not limited to, the official end of war declaration, which was recently mentioned by President Moon Jae-in. And No further stated he believes the end of war declaration suggested by President Moon at the recent UN General Assembly is one of the most effective actions out of South Korea's confidence-building measures with North Korea. He also added he shared with Kim the two countries' evaluation of the North's recent strain of statements and missile firings during a phone call. And No further reiterated South and U.S.'s aims in breaking through the current situation. And a face-to-face meeting between Washington and Seoul will be held today. And this latest meeting took place in before this one took place in Tokyo about 2 weeks ago.
The stance of Washington and Seoul seems unchanged even by the latest quote-unquote provocation for North Korea. We're not using that word unless it is officially confirmed to be one. But however, the idea, it seems, to again get North Korea back to the discussion table. On to our fifth keyword of the day.
COVID-19 and Beijing 2022.
We just wrapped up Tokyo, but we have to talk about Beijing. Let's talk about the upcoming Winter Olympics. With this year's Tokyo Olympic Games held almost without an audience, of course, questions were raised about what the spectator situation will look like in China. Will the Beijing Games accommodate a bigger audience?
Yes, well, as of now, only Chinese audience will be allowed as spectators in the 2022 Beijing Olympic Games, which is set for next February. And according to Reuters and Xinhua News, the Beijing Olympic Organizing Committee introduced its COVID-19 countermeasures during a meeting which was convened by the International Olympic Committee, or IOC in short. And measures read that the organizing committee will only sell tickets to those residing within China who also fulfill necessary COVID-19 safety requirements. And this is quite in contrast with this year's Summer Olympic Games, as Japan did not allow fans in the Games, but only some spectators for events held in other regions besides Tokyo of the country. An automatic regulatory management system will also be operated towards Olympic participants starting from next year's January 23rd to March 13th, which marks the end of the Beijing Paralympic Games. Now, to talk more about this system, it will cover all Olympic-related venues of incoming, departure, transportation, accommodation, meals, and the actual games. And also, athletes will only be able to move between training and game facilities. To add on, all Olympic personnel ranging from athletes to staff will be subject to take COVID-19 tests on a daily basis. And especially for those who aren't fully vaccinated before the Olympic Games, they will need to undergo a mandatory 21-day quarantine upon their arrival in Beijing.
So it seems conditioning for these athletes for the Beijing Games will also be tricky if you haven't been fully vaccinated. vaccinated.
Right. And Beijing will host its Winter Olympic Games from February 4th to 20th next year and the Paralympic Games from March 4th to March 13th.
All right, and leading up to these, we'll probably get more details on what these quarantine measures will further look like for participating athletes. And moving on to our last keyword of the day.
Evergrande's bid for survival.
So more in China. The country's second largest property developer, Evergrande, has been struggling in a debt fiasco. Of course, the indication of what this might mean for China's economy and all the investors inland and outside of China is causing concern. They're even at the brink of going default. But the property giant may overcome its liquidity problems. Tell us what's in the plan.
Yes, well, struggling with more than $300 billion in debt, Evergrande had been trying hard to raise funds, facing its upcoming $47.5 million bond investment deadline on Wednesday after it reportedly missed a bond interest payment last week. And the group decided to sell off part of its relatively minor assets to overcome its temporary liquidity problems. And specifically, it announced on Wednesday that it had sealed a deal to sell off 19.93%, which is 1.75 billion share it owns in the Xiangjing Bank, to the Shenyang Xiangjing Finance Investment Group. And if this sell-off process is completed, Evergrande will guarantee 1.8 trillion won worth funds, which will help it overcome imminent liquidity risks such as interest payments for bonds and financial loans.
The timing is also worth noting. It comes before a pretty important and long holiday in China, for that matter.
Yeah, that's right. And this decision comes just days before the start of China's 7-day National Day holiday. And this is important because before, it had been speculated that Beijing would devise specific measures to stabilize its market before entering such a long holiday.
Right.
And right now, pundits are expecting Evergrande to sell off its stakes in additional assets to help it reap more funds. For instance, the group may sell its EV electric vehicle affiliate Evergrande New Energy Vehicle Group to companies such as Xiaomi. And another possibility is the group officially announcing default on some of its bonds and selling all or part of its main property business to state-owned enterprises operating under the Chinese government. Well, so far, the Chinese government has not made it clear whether it would step in and bail out Evergrande. So actually, more predictions are leaning towards the government, guiding the group to at least an orderly bankruptcy, even if it does not directly rescue the group, as Evergrande's debt crisis holds great potential of destabilizing the world's second largest economy. So despite Evergrande's such efforts of trying to offload its assets, a grim picture lies ahead of the group on whether it would be able to assure enough liquidity due to the escalating uncertainty of global stocks.
All right. Thank you so much, Eugene, for today's coverage. It was thorough and detailed, and we'll see you again tomorrow, same time.
Thank you so much.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.